There are a lot of Johto ROM hacks. Scorched Silver, Crystal Clear, GS Chronicles, the list goes on. It's kind of an undiscussed talking point, which kind of surprises me, because despite the number of Kanto and Hoenn focused hacks, Johto comes in pretty close in third place. Unlike those two regions though, there isn't an official GBA title that hosts the second generation, meaning most developers will need to recreate it on their own, leading to hacks with a lot more creativity and unique characteristics outside of the Pokemon battles. So when I first saw the Reddit post for a brand new ROM hack called Heart and Soul, I asked myself the question that first comes to my head whenever I see a project taking place in an official region, and that's what separates this hack from every other that takes place in Johto or Kanto or whatever other place the developer chose to host their project. Which is a really important question that for some people makes the difference between whether they play it or immediately lose interest and move on to something else. I have to say though, the enjoyability of this hack really caught me off guard, so much so that I ended up finishing the main story in only 3 days. So in this video, I'll be talking about what I think the hack does well, what I think should be improved, and why I believe it's the definitive Johto experience. But what exactly does that mean? What does it take to be the definitive Johto experience? Well, the way I think about it, the hack would have to offer enough features that allow it to appeal to the widest audience possible, without any crazy gimmicks that alienate a large group of players. And I think the biggest thing Heart and Soul does to achieve that is customization, which I will talk about in a little bit, because while writing the script, I thought it would make more sense to first discuss the hack's unchangeable or uncustomizable differences between the official Johto games. First and foremost, this is not a difficulty hack. There are ways to make the game more challenging, which again I'll talk about in a bit, but Heart and Soul only makes two major changes to the game's overall difficulty level. First, the trainer teams of Johto gym leaders have been significantly improved, with both party members from their native region and roster sizes that actually make sense for what part of the game you're in. The teams feel pretty natural too, almost like compositions these trainers would actually have if Game Freak thought about them for more than 4 seconds. Secondly, the level curve has been significantly improved. Wild Pokemon and those of regular NPC trainers are only a couple levels below yours, if not on par, and the 5th through 7th gym leaders have unique teams depending on which order you choose to fight them in. But like I said before, this is not a difficulty hack, and for the most part bears the same level of challenge as something like Pokemon Emerald or Platinum would offer. A more interesting change though is that apricorns have been entirely replaced by berries. Even the construction of the Pokeballs now requires berries instead, which has also been made a much quicker process. There are also a few events and features from the remakes, but the big ones that aren't present would be the Pokeathlon and the Battle Frontier. Finally, the game includes Pokemon up to the 3rd generation, with every later gen evolution, encounter pools that are a mix between the remakes and crystals, and Hoenn Pokemon being rare encounters in the Kanto region, giving the best of both worlds for the variety of Pokemon. So while all those changes might seem a bit underwhelming compared to the especially more recent Johto hacks, what really stands out about Heart and Soul is the customization. We've all played through those enhancement hacks where the start of our adventure is gated behind a series of questions about difficulty modes, randomizers, or even minimal grinding. This hack takes that about 10 steps further. As I was presented with customization options I haven't seen in any non-roguelike ROM hack. In fact, I'm willing to bet that Heart and Soul provides the most amount of gameplay customization in any Pokemon ROM hack I've played before. However, it should be known that there are two types of customization options, those that can be accessed from the pause menu, and the others that, as far as I know, are only configurable at the start of the game. So, at any point while playing, you can toggle the physical special split, following Pokemon, and a handful of other mod modifiers that affect how fast the battle animations play out. From the start of the game though, yeah, there's a lot. Most of them can be pretty minor or not cared for depending on the type of player you are, so I'm not going to spend an extra minute listing them off as you can already see them on screen. The ones I want to focus on though are the minimal grinding and experience gained options. In most hacks, the minimal grinding mode disables EVs and sets all wild Pokemon to 31 IVs, a single setting that's provided to you with no way to toggle its individual modifiers. Here, however, you have a lot more control, allowing you to choose if you and/or your enemies have access to EV gains, how you want your own and enemy Pokemon's IV spreads to scale, and if you find yourself craving a challenge, you can even force your opponents to have 252 EVs in every stat. This was a really nice amount of customization to have, because while I don't like hunting for good IV Pokemon, I'm not entirely against the idea of EV gains. What I cared about more though was the other set of customization options, being both the amount of experience you can earn and what kind of level cap, if at all, you'd like to play with. I'm not going to lie, double EXP combined with the level cap and the EXP all made for a very grind-free experience that let me swap team members in and out of my party and not have to worry about being over-leveled. The absurd amount of customization this game offers would even alone make me consider this hack to be the definitive Johto experience. But somehow, it gets even better. If it wasn't already obvious, Heart and Soul has a variety of different visual enhancements, with many outdoor locations having updated battle backgrounds, and of course Pokemon being able to follow behind you. But there's a level of detail in this hack that you likely haven't noticed or thought much of up until this point, a visual enhancement that also affects the gameplay. You see, while you travel through the different routes, you'll spot various Pokemon climbing through trees, sitting atop houses, or swimming in the water. These sprites aren't just for extra detail, rather a display of what Pokemon can be found on the route, which I found to be a lot more interesting than the DexNav or any other kind of infographic that just tells you what's in each area. I also really want to compliment the updates to the overworld tile sets. Each city very much stood out from one another, with various differences in houses and color, and the trees and mountainsides got increasingly darker as you traveled more north within the region. These maps were very clearly designed by someone who adores the 3rd generation style, but also understands what can be done to improve it. These changes might not sound like a big deal to some of you, but as someone who's played through dozens of hacks or even fan games that just use or don't even change the default Fire Red tile sets, I really appreciate the effort that's been made here. Before we move on though, I wanted to quickly talk about the important quality of life features I didn't get to in the previous segments. Like I said before, you will have access to the EXP all from the very start of the game. If you aren't a fan of that system though, you'll still be able to find many of the old held item versions, one of which can be obtained especially early. Secondly, the Pokédex displays the stats and learnable moves of every Pokemon you've captured. Many Pokemon have also had their evolution requirements modified, of course getting rid of trait evolutions, but also just allowing them to be easily obtained compared to the official Johto games. HMs can be used without one of your Pokemon learning the attack, and finally, if it wasn't displayed in an earlier segment, you will have the choice of playing with infinite TMs, something that I really can't see myself ever choosing not to use. However, it should be noted that the game uses Emerald's TM list, meaning many of the ones you receive will differ from the ones you normally find within the 2nd generation. I think Heart and Soul was a really great experience, and truly deserves the title of the definitive Johto ROM hack, at least for the GBA. However, I do have one piece of criticism that I feel I should address. With the game's base being Emerald, obviously most Pokemon are plagued with terrible learn sets, something this hack actually does try to combat with an optional enhanced moveset setting. This is a pretty common practice in enhancement hacks, as it usually makes makes a lot of the more underwhelming Pokemon much more viable, and provide a few changes to already powerful ones that just make sense. However, I feel that Heart and Soul kind of ignores a lot of those weaker Pokemon, mostly giving learn set buffs to those that already excelled within the region. Of course, the TM variety in the mid-game definitely helped, but I still felt that a lot of grass, bug, and especially fairy types very much lacked a lot of useful or diverse attacks until the very late game, if at all. Like I said before, the base game without any difficulty modifiers is still pretty easy, so it's not something that will drastically hurt your overall experience, but it will make a lot of those Pokemon feel a lot less enjoyable to use compared to the buffed or already powerful ones. Before I end this video, there's one more thing about this hack I'd like to bring up. At the beginning, I said that there isn't an official base for the second generation on the GBA, which is likely one of the biggest obstacles for people trying to make a Johto ROM hack. Well, that isn't exactly the case anymore, because while Heart and Soul technically isn't official, it is entirely open source, meaning you can use it as a base for a difficulty, story-focused, or whatever kind of hack you'd like set in the Johto region. This is probably one of my favorite aspects about this project, as not only was it a fun experience, but it also opened the door for even more. So overall, I do believe that Heart and Soul absolutely deserves the title of the definitive Johto experience, as not only does it fix all of the region's problems, but also adds a ton of new features while still staying true to the original games. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe for more Pokemon ROM hacks. Thank you to my channel members for their continued support, and have a nice rest of your day.